I'm Miranda, and I'm a Disney cast member reject.
I'm here today to talk about my experience as a Disney cast member and why I inevitably ended up self-terming early from my college program. It's something that has taken me a long time to come to terms with. It's something that I regret doing, but at the same time, I know deep down it is the right thing that I've done because of how certain events within the company have panned out over these past few months, and stories I've heard, and statements from cast member friends that are still down there, and things like that. So this is going to be a long video. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible, but in that meantime, grab your drinks, grab your snacks, grab your friends, grab your pets, whatever. Make yourself comfy because I'm about to dive into why I self-termed from the Disney College Program. I did the Disney College Program in spring into fall 2017. That means I ended up being able to extend my program beyond my original departure date of August 3rd, 2017. My role was custodial. I was a SK, or showkeeper, at Disney Hollywood Studios, and I absolutely loved it. I know there's a whole stigma around custodial and why, custodial has this whole stigma of being dirty and gross, but honestly, I loved my job. I loved the people I met. I loved my coworkers. It's honestly one of the best jobs you can have because there's a lot of freedom to that job in itself, but it can also be super stressful. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, if you loved your job, why did you end up self-terming? Well, there's a lot of factors that come into play here, and it all eventually ended up adding up little by little, which at the end made me decide, okay, it's time for me to go home. So let me backtrack. I went through the first half of my program no problem. Actually, that's a lie. My first month there, I was extremely overwhelmed. I was extremely stressed. I had a lot of anxiety. I felt like a fish out of water because working for such a big company like that, it's extremely overwhelming, and sometimes you feel like they demand much more out of you than you can actually give. So the best piece of advice I can give if you are interested in doing the college program is you have to be willing to give 110% of yourself. This isn't 50%, this isn't 75%, this isn't even 100%, because 100% is not even good enough. It's 110% of yourself that you have to give to the company when you're on stage at all times. Now, I'm an older CP, so I have had experience in the workforce. I've worked a slew of jobs, so I came in open-minded because, working retail around Black Friday, working in hospitality, you know how demanding it can be. So I felt like I was going to be okay and that I would overcome any kind of anxiety or issues that I may have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, I did. So the first few months of my program were stressful. I worked 60-hour weeks, 6 days with 1 day off. Some shifts were 15 to 16 and a half hours long with 8 hours in between. So let's say I did a 16-hour shift where I opened and I worked all the way to close. I would have 8 hours and have to go back into work and open. So really, my body wasn't getting rest in between work. I wasn't getting enough rest, but I just learned to end up adapting. I decided around April yeah, it was around April, I decided I was going to extend my program. Originally, I didn't want to. Originally, I was going to go home because I felt like it was enough time and that I really wasn't going to get much out of this job. Because it's honestly a good entry-level job. It's nothing that you can really plan on doing long-term. There isn't a lot of growth in certain roles. And if you want growth, then sometimes if you want to go from being like a CP up to leadership, that means you have to do a professional internship, which you have to do a college program to do a professional internship. And I didn't see myself growing within the company. It's just a dream I had always wanted to do. You know, I did that dream and I didn't want to stay. But I also had a boyfriend back home, and that kind of is what was my drive to make me go back home. But things kind of worked out in, I guess you could say, a good and bad way, where we ended up breaking up, and I realized, you know, I really have nothing left back home to go for. You know, my family's okay, so why didn't I just stay? Like, I was happy at that time. I was making friends. I was going out and experiencing life and doing things that I have never done. Because, mind you, I live in Connecticut. Connecticut and Florida are like two different states. You know, up north we have like New York City, we have like Boston. However, in Florida, you have so much to do because Florida is such a big state. So if you want to go to the beach, you can go to the beach. If you want to go down to Miami, you can go to Miami. If you want to go see gators, you can go out into the Everglades. So that's what I really fell in love with when I was in Florida. So I ended up applying for my extension, and I was accepted into my extension, and I took it. So my move-out date for my first apartment was July 31st, 2017. And that means I had to move out of my apartment and move in with a brand new set of roommates. August 3rd was originally my departure date. And at this time, it was like right when I went to my extension that I realized things were going to be much more challenging, I think, my second half than they were my first. And that's because all my friends who weren't extending were leaving. So that means everyone that, you know, I grew close to left me. And this includes, you know, my really, really good friend, Destiny, who I call my wife, and my really good friend, Eric. They ended up leaving me in between July and August. So I had to overcome kind of meeting all these new CPs that were coming in, and also adapting to living with roommates that I had only known. There was one. Noelle was lucky enough to be so generous and match up with me on Facebook so we could be roommates. But it was going to be a challenge. And then I had more stress added onto me because I am so humble and so grateful, but I was hired to be one of the first custodial trainers that was still a CP. For a long time, Hollywood Studios had a ban where college program participants were not allowed to become trainers. I was one of the first in many years where I was able to be a trainer. So me and Zach, who was also another CP, we were the first CP trainers at our park in many, many years. So that to me was like this whole new like stress onto me, because I was going from being just a regular custodial cast member and being bumped up on a pedestal now where I was responsible for properly training cast members and making sure they were properly trained. So I didn't start training until, I'm gonna say, late August, early September. Around the time Irma came, I trained the weekend before Irma came and the weekend after Irma came, and then I had trained like here and there. So I wasn't consistently training. So I wasn't really training as much as I had anticipated, but I still was able to be a trainer and, you know, got to have that experience as a Disney trainer, which was humbling and great, and I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity. And there are days where I wish I would have stayed and rode that trainer train up to coordinator like some of my friends after me who took my place were able to do. But it is what it is. So things started getting progressively worse, and I think, things start to go downhill because I got back together with my ex-boyfriend, who's now my current boyfriend, but we had been broken up for about 4 months at this point, no contact, and we had gotten back together. My boyfriend has been battling cancer on and off for 2 years, and the distance with him dealing with his diagnosis was one of the factors that plays into why I ended up coming home early. But that's just one of the things that kind of was the icing on the cake that was about to explode for my love for Disney. In November of 2017, everything at my park changed, and it was stressful and it was anxiety inducing. So pretty much what happened was we found out on the next bid, and how Disney works when you're a full-time or a part-time cast member is every 6 months you have the opportunity to bid either to move roles, so that means custodial and you want to go to attractions, you can move to attractions, or you could stay within custodial if there weren't transfers available, and you would have to bid for your, like, what kind of hours you wanted. So full-time, they get 2 days off a week, they get 40 hours a week. They aren't forced to work like college program CPs are. And when you're full-time, you bid what days off you want, whether or not you want to be a morning, mid, or closing shift, and if you want to be streets or restrooms. We found out at this time that a good chunk of theater district in Hollywood Studios. Now, theater district is Indiana Jones. That's the middle stage where the Great Movie Ride was, R.I.P. Star Tours, all the restaurants in between. They were going to be absorbing Muppets. Now, I was status Southlands. Southlands will forever be with my heart. Southlands is also known as Pixar Place, Toy Story Mania, and Muppets 3D Vision. That's where I was status, and that's where I mainly worked. So I always worked between all the restrooms that were in Southlands, or I did either one of the two street zones, which were 51 and 52. Well, Theater District ended up absorbing a huge amount of that in preparation for Toy Story Land that was opening. So, because they, at that point, Southlands only had 2 restrooms because they merged with Animation, and Animation is Launch Bay, Star Wars Launch Bay, and Disney Junior Live and Voyage of Little Mermaid. So they ended up merging Toy Story with Animation, and then Theater District took Muppets, which means they cut off a huge chunk of an area for CPs like me that had been status there since I first started my program back in January, and I was forced out of Southlands, and I ended up getting restatus to Park Arrival. And there were 2 areas at Hollywood Studios I absolutely hated, and that was Park Arrival, and that was Sunset Boulevard. Now, Park Arrival, okay, it was doable, it was small. Sunset Boulevard was absolute hell. Okay, Sunset Boulevard is the equivalent to Main Street USA in Magic Kingdom, especially during the holiday when they started doing the projection show on the Tower of Terror. So, I was not so thrilled that I was forced out of my home, that I had grown to love, with leaders that I trusted, that I knew, that I could communicate with, because I had had past issues with certain leaders that worked in Park Arrival, because that's one of the issues with custodial at that time, was each area had its own custodial leaders, and not all of them were on the same page. So let's say my leaders in Southlands, they knew what to expect out of me I knew what to expect out of them. I knew how they wanted things done. However, when you are forced into a different area, like Sunset Boulevard, Theater District, or Park Arrival, they each had their own methods based on their leadership on how they believed custodial should be done. So they might see something in a restroom that another leader would take care of. For instance, getting threatened with a write-up because I had drops of water left on a sink because we had to squeegee the sinks. I never had that issue in Southlands because my leaders actually carried squeegees. The female coordinators carried squeegees, and they would help us out in that department because there's no way to control the amount of water, regardless of how many times you squeegee. There's going to be water that's on a sink. That's just a part of having a sink. So it was like things like that. So I was upset that I ended up moving to Park Arrival. And this was a second ding because at this point, some of my good friends were gone. I was now being forced from the remainder of the people I loved and grew close to and looked forward to working with on a daily basis. And what also added to this was hours. Hours came into play. Hours became a huge, tremendous struggle at this point in time. Disney ended up doing a layoff around Thanksgiving where they laid off, I believe, like between 200 and 300 upper management cast members because they always cut from the top rather than cutting from the bottom. And most of this is because of all the construction they were doing for Star Wars Land or Galaxy's Edge and for Toy Story Land, and also them trying to reap back the money that they put into Pandora amongst all the resort expansions, the hotels, everything else that they are trying to work on for 2021 for the 50th anniversary? I think it's the 50th. So hours became a huge problem. And what I mean by hours is I consistently was working anywhere between 48 and 60 hours a week at the beginning of my program. They kind of dwindled down a little bit in the summer to where I had 2 days off, but I was still always working like 40 hours, which is normal in any full-time job. You work 40 hours, you have 2 days off. So that gave me the leeway to be able to, go to the parks more. I didn't have to worry about doing classwork anymore and things like that. Well, come around this time, I was all of a sudden going from 48 to 60 hours a week where I was getting overtime pay, and all of a sudden being cut into 30 hours a week. So 30 hours a week at minimum wage, which I was making $10 an hour at that time, you go, okay, you're making $300 a week. That's not so bad. It wouldn't have been so bad, but you have to account for the fact that taxes get taken out, you automatically have rent deducted, plus I have my own personal bills. Like I had credit cards to pay, groceries to buy, stuff like that I had to be responsible to take care of. So at the end of the month, I might have $700 after you deduct taxes and stuff. But when you add all the bills that come into play, I'm lucky if I had 100, and I know it's like crazy because there's a saying that you don't work at Disney for the money, you work at Disney for the atmosphere, which I completely agree with. But I had been okay. I hadn't struggled up until this point when the hours cut back because I was no longer getting that extra income. I was no longer getting my training pay because I did get a pay raise when I was training. So that just really put me into this stress mode because my program was coming to an end January 4th, and I didn't know where I was going to be after that or how long it was going to be until I found another job, and I was trying to save everything I could. Money is one of the biggest things you will struggle with on your college program, whether you believe it or not. No matter how much you try to budget, no matter how cheap you try to be, trust me, I hardly ever ate at any of the restaurants or even in the parks. I tried to be as minimal as I could when it came to spending money because I knew I was only there for a set amount of time with no guarantee of long-term employment. Even if I wanted to apply part-time, full-time, seasonal, there's no guarantee you're going to get that. So hours started becoming an issue. And this is really around the time after being switched to a new location within my park that I started growing disdain for the company. The icing on the cake that blew my mind was I was training one day, and I was training one girl on restrooms, and there was another trainer who was also training, and we decided to do a combined training. I was going to train mine, she was going to train hers, but because we were both doing restrooms and we go to the same area, where if you're a trainer and you train restrooms, you normally take your trainees up to Phantasmic because it's a big bathroom and you set it up for the Phantasmic crew that comes up later on in the evening. We were in the cast computer lab inside the cast building, where cast members come, and you have to go through the cheese grater gate after scanning your blue badge, and you could hang out there and use their computers, or you could use their computers for whatever. Sometimes I would go there if I had to wait to clock in, depending on the CP bus. I would do school assignments and stuff like that. So we were in the cast computer lab, and on the other side, so there was like a barrier, like a wall like this. On, let's say, this side, closest to you, is where the coordinators were for theater district. On this side was the cast computer lab. One of the coordinators, the female coordinators, stuck her head up over the wall and was like, hey, just so you know, you're not allowed to train this certain cast member today. Mind you, this certain cast member was there and had already clocked in for her training shift, but the coordinator was not going to allow us to train her because she was trans. The issue they were having was they didn't have a male coordinator to train her, and this cast member audibly said to the coordinator, I identify as female, I don't identify as male, I identify as female. So I want to be trained by a female coordinator. And she was trying to argue with the other trainer there that we weren't allowed to train her because there weren't any males. But we ended up saying, tough, we're going to take her and we're going to train her because we're going up to Phantasmic anyway. What does it matter? No one's even there. This is when I found out that if you're a trans cast member, after Pulse happened, and as much pride as Disney tries to stress, if you're a trans cast member, they will not allow you to identify as the gender that you identify with unless you have medical documentation from your doctor stating that you identify as male or female. Which, I get it, it's a safety thing. However, the way it was handled very unprofessionally. Putting her on the spot like that in a room with other cast members that you don't know what their personal beliefs are, it put this cast member in a very unsafe situation. And it could have been handled better. It could have been handled in private. However, later on that day, after we left and we had to go to Sunset Boulevard for what's called Track Talk. Now, Track Talk is a little meeting they do twice a day for like opening / mid cast members and then like closing cast members, and it kind of gives you the rundown of the numbers that they projected for the park that day, as well as any like breaking news, like new projects, new things adding to the park, just things like that. Well, the other trainer and this cast member ended up being pulled aside by leadership, and leadership gave this cast member a problem, and this is when the cast member found out that they needed medical documentation proving that they identified as female, and that medical professionals considers them female and not the gender that they were born with. And after that, this cast member was never allowed to work in a restroom. They made this cast member specifically just work streets. That's all she did. She was strictly streets. She never got to clean a restroom because of this. And there were other cast members who were also trans, who I had noticed would, like, let's say they were in custodial, all of a sudden they'd be recasted elsewhere because Disney didn't want them in a role where they have to interact with people in such a close fashion, especially in such an intimate setting as a bathroom. And I understand it's a safety precaution. However, you can't assume that someone who identifies as female, who may be born, you know, with a penis, is going to rape someone. Because 9 times out of 10, they are more at risk of being raped than they are of raping someone. So, I started getting a lot of animosity. I started going to a really dark place. I had a lot of anxiety. I was stressed out all the time. I was falling into a depression. I was struggling to afford groceries at this point. And I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, well, Miranda, you could have went on and picked up shifts. You know, you could have gotten extra hours. Unfortunately, I was not the only person that was struggling at this time. A lot of my part-time friends were only maybe getting 12 hours a week. So what am I going to do in the situation of me who's at least contractually obligated to where I have to get a minimum of 30 hours versus a part-time cast member who actually has a roof over their head that they have to pay for and their own bills and families and stuff like that, where they're only getting 12 hours. In that point, you give those part-time cast members the hours that they need to survive, because it's unfair that Disney is choosing CPs in a way over their own part-time cast members and giving most of the luxuries to the full-time cast members. So that too was also like, how can a company that makes so much money, that owns all these franchises, that owns all these networks, not afford to give their part-time cast members the hours that they need, to give them the certain benefits that they need to survive, or to even afford a pay raise? And this is going into the whole union strikes that have been going on, in order for them to finally force the $15 minimum wage, which actually just got passed. So thankfully, everyone down there by 2021, they will get the pay raise that they so rightfully deserve, because it's not cheap to live in Orlando. If you want to live somewhere cheap, you have to commute far. Florida is such a wide state that 3 miles could be 30 minutes, which blows my mind because 3 miles here in Connecticut is 10 minutes. So you are having to commute more, waste more gas in order to get to work. I had a trainee that I trained who was commuting 2 hours each way. That's 4 hours a commute, so she could get to work, and she was seasonal. I really made a promise to myself that I was going to finish up my program, but I ended up deciding that I was going to self-term, and I really wish like I would have done things differently, because I ended up coming home the week before Thanksgiving to see family, because I didn't think I was going to be home for the holidays. And I remember my roommate Noelle asking me if I was going to end up self-terming, and asking me not to self-term because we had issues with one of the girls that we lived with, and she was worried that this roommate that we all were having problems with was going to move in to the room and take over my bed, or like my space that me and Noelle shared. So I promised her, listen, I will stay as long as I can. That way this won't happen, because they were feuding, and it ended up turning into them feuding into where all of us were feuding, like, with her, so it was like 5 girls against 1. So that's a different story for another day. So I came home the week before Thanksgiving, and I saw my boyfriend, and a part of me, like, when I was packing to come home, because I also was starting to move stuff back, because I had anticipated moving home January 4th, but I didn't want to have to worry about, like, shipping so much stuff, because you do end up accumulating crap when you're down there, unfortunately. I hate to say it, but you do. So I ended up moving stuff back, but a part of me was like, why don't I just pack up and just not come back? But I was like, no, you know, I signed on to extend until January 4th. Yeah, at this point, I had 6 weeks until my program was going to be done. I was like, I can do this. And when I was in the airport waiting to fly back to Orlando, I was just like, I shouldn't be going. I should be staying. I shouldn't be going. I ended up flying back home, and I was able to attend the formal, which if you stay in the fall, you get to go to the DCP formal, which is kind of like DCP prom, and then I also got to attend the graduation, which I ended up having to miss Starlight Splash because I had to work at cheer convention till 4 a.m. that night. I'm still triggered by it. But after I came back, I think it was like maybe like a few days after, or like two days after, I remember going into Magic Kingdom, and it was the first time I had ever seen Magic Kingdom at Christmas time, because they had the Christmas decorations up at this time. And I remember seeing the castle light up, and I remember thinking to myself, I still feel the magic being able to see something like that I had never like got to experience before, and I didn't want to completely end up being so engulfed by hate for this company that then and there I decided that while I still love this place and everything that it's done for me, how showed me, I decided that the best thing for me to do was to self-term. So the plan was, I was going to self-term on Christmas Eve. And I know that sounds ridiculous because really it was 10 days out from the end of my program. But I really wanted to surprise my boyfriend, and I wanted to surprise my grandmother for Christmas by coming home early, because they didn't expect me until after Christmas. So I called my mom and I bought the plane ticket, and we made the plans for me to be picked up from the airport when my plane landed on Christmas Eve. So the plan was set in motion. There were bumps along the way. I'm not gonna say that when I left I didn't regret my decision, because there were events that happened leading up to me leaving where I honestly started dreading my decision, because I just feel like I was going to be going home to things that I wasn't sure I was ready to go home to. But my last day in Magic Kingdom, the day before I left, I knew it was the best thing that I had to do in that time for my mental health, and for everything else that I was going through at that time. I needed to be home with my family. I needed to be close to my boyfriend because he had his own demons that he was dealing with, and so I left. Christmas morning I called and I let Housing know that I self-termed, and I watched the New Year's Eve fireworks here from home, and cried and wished that I didn't leave. And I still battle with this all the time, where I wish I didn't come home, but I also know it's the best thing because I get so mad. I get so mad when I think about some of the things I saw that the company do inside, and they're just like things like you don't know until you work there, that you can understand like what I mean by, you know, how seeing such a big company like that can treat so many cast members at a time. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It pretty much at all times in that, when you work there, you feel like you're one small little ant and like a huge like factory of ants, and that honestly you get replaced so quickly that it doesn't matter how much you bust your ass, or you know how hard you strive, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any respect from anyone. And yeah, I just don't know how to explain it, because my cast member friends understand, but when I talk to like people back home that are like, why are you home from Disney, like didn't you move to Florida, it's like you I can't explain it, because you weren't there to like live it and to see the behind the scenes, to see the union strikes all the time, to see them dealing with the union votes, them striking outside of Disney Springs all the time, seeing cast members that are part-time like struggling in poverty-like conditions in order, you know, to make ends meet, because that's the huge draw in Central Florida are all amusement parks. So even between like Universal Studios and like Disney, and you have SeaWorld, Disney owns a huge amount of land down there. So think there's 70,000 cast members in Central Florida. 70,000 in Central Florida alone. So of course people are gonna work there. But I more or less made this video so that way if you are struggling with the decision to self-term, I'm here to tell you that yes, regardless of what people might tell you, regardless of how people might make you feel, regardless of how like you have that constant like devil and angel whispering in your ear, it's okay to self-term. Nothing bad's gonna happen to you. The world isn't gonna explode. Disney will still go on. But you need to put your mental health before Disney. And Disney doesn't care about your mental health. They don't care about your depression. They don't care about your personal like issues going on at home, because they want 110% out of you at all times. And don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to cast members that are CPs that are gonna tell you you're lazy and you're stupid for leaving, because that's not true. They're not in your shoes. They don't know how you feel. They don't know what's going on at home, or what's going on in your head, or how physically exhausted you might feel. If you're struggling with money, go home. I'm telling you, don't put yourself in a hole. It's not worth it. If you find a better job and you're deciding, should I leave Disney or should I stay? Go home. Go take that job. Disney is a great learning experience if you have never worked before, but for the long term, no. Like one of my former coordinators told me, working for Disney is like working for a glorified Walmart. And that's the truth. That's exactly the truth. Retail is a revolving door, and Disney is a revolving door. And I know I might get some backlash and hate, but this is my opinion. This is my story. This is exactly how I felt leaving. This is my truth. So I'm not asking for you to have to agree with my reasons for leaving, and I'm not asking for your pity. This is me just explaining one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make in my life, in case there's another person out there who is struggling with the decision to go home or to leave a dream job that they had, you know, thought was going to be long term, because it's okay. I promise you it's okay. I am not the only person who has felt this way. I was inspired to do this video after watching Brooke Maglish. I will link her video below because I actually watched a lot of her videos right before my CP started in January of 2017. So when I saw her video earlier today where she had similar reasons to why she ended up quitting Disney and going back home, I was like, all right, it's time for me to tell my story, because I have been struggling emotionally with this for a long time, and it feels like a huge weight is being taken off of my shoulders. So I hope that this video helps someone out there. And if you'd like to see any more Disney videos or any kind of Storytime video, because I have some crazy stories from Disney, I have some crazy roommate stories from Disney, I also have just crazy general life stories too. Comment below, like, subscribe, comment. No, I'm kidding. Just let me know. If not, thank you for watching, and if you didn't watch my whole video, thanks for not watching. Anyway, bye guys. Have a great day.